hard to find someone on.
Like, on what level is this
The topic is niche.
The topic is niche. Or we have the other one, which is, oh, well, we've already done the menopause book this year. like anything to do with
You've had your woke up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did perimenopause and vaginal dryness. The clitoris is just gonna have to wait for next year.
Back to why is this important? Although, having said that, it was really important to me in writing my book that I cheer-led for pleasure all round and said, actually, there is so much that women have been denied in terms of their knowledge around the clitoris, that actually those are the obvious jokes to make about it, about men not being able to find it, that actually men need all the encouragement they can get.
But it's kind of like when you look into the history of it, it's almost no wonder that men don't really know where it is, because women, they know they can locate it on a map, obviously, but like when it comes to understanding what this organ is, what it does, fighting it free from the myths and nonsense that surrounds it, it's almost like we're all.
Yes, I mean, when so many women still don't know about the construction of the clitoris, and it's not in school anatomy textbooks, it's not in sex ed, it's in galleries, and I don't know if you're familiar with Sylvia Lawless's construction of the clitoris. She's not in mainstream galleries. You can go to any gallery and the pieces are absolutely amazing. So we've all been denied He acknowledged it as the pleasure center, but it was his books that kind of came along and brought him down saying that actually no, you can't see this as a pleasure center. Actually, it was about enslaving women rather than wealthy women. And that was Vesalius. He was the master anatomist, and Vesalius worked under him. And that was how Columbo's great discovery got lost, meaning that de Graaf could come back and did remain in the culture. So whatever it was, the mainstream dominant culture was just not interested in female sexuality. But when you look at the vernacular culture, have you heard of that incredible book, Aristotle's Masterpiece?
Please tell us all about it.
Yes, so it came out in 1684 and was really a mishmash of all of the learning and a ton of old wives' tales that anybody had. And there's a copy in the British Museum, and the curator there said it was a book, quote, for the everyday people that would have been cheaply printed and sold under the table. And when you go back and look at this book, there's a huge emphasis in it on female pleasure and the importance of female pleasure. And what I found strikingly absent from it were any descriptions of the vagina as a site of pleasure.
Wow.
So in the book, you get descriptions of the female anatomy. It includes the paragraphs on the labia, the cervix, the womb, but just no mention of the vagina. It's purely presented as a sheath for the penis. And
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Aristotle's Masterpiece, in his chapter, The External and Internal Organs of Generation in Women, he wrote, "It is absolutely necessary that they should be known for the public good." He writes,
yes.
Yeah.
Hard agree.
The clitoris is a substance in the upper part of the division where the two wings meet, the seat of pleasure, being like a man's penis in situation, substance, composition, and power of erection, growing sometimes to the length of 2 inches, but that never happens except through extreme lustfulness. So yes, people knew about the clitoris. Oh my goodness, don't we wish that we had this in sex ed today?
I wonder what awaits us
I'll
there.
be back with Sarah after
The unknown is
break.
frightening.
Did Edison really take credit for things he didn't invent? Were treadmills originally a form of corporal punishment? And would man have ever got to the moon without the bra? You can expect answers to all these questions and more in the brand new podcast from History Hit, patented History of Inventions. Join me, Dallas Campbell, as I uncover what really sparked history's most impactful ideas. Each episode, I'll be recruiting the help of experts, scientists, historians, and even a few real-life inventors. Subscribe to Patented History of Inventions wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Cars don't worry about how they sound. But people do. That's why My Car offer general repairs at an affordable price. A logbook service with 12 months free roadside assistance and free puncture repairs on selected tyres from their tyre care range. T's and C's apply. Learn more at mycar.com.au or call 13 13 28. My Car Tyre and Auto. People first.
This is a big deal. Actually, it's a huge deal. Hang on, this is a massive winter deal. Switch to Energy Australia for a massive 25% off gas rates for home and business. That's right, save 25% off your total gas bill plus no gas rate rises for 12 months when you switch before August 1. Call Energy Australia on 133 466 today. Vic eligible customers only. Conditions apply. Available on select plans. Guaranteed discount is off our market energy charges and applies for the applicable benefit period.
I love the fact that the labia are called wings. I like that. It makes me feel like it's a superhero.
Yeah,
I love
that too.
But he just finished off there by saying something that I think that I want to talk about a little bit here. So, like, we find text where, and it's clear that people knew what this was, or at least anatomists did. And it's easy to look at stuff like Columbo and de Graaf and think, oh, brilliant, yeah, like they clearly know this is a good thing for pleasure. But just then, in the Aristotle's masterpiece, it started to go into. It only gets really big in cases of extreme lustfulness because there is quite a lot of clit bashing and anti-clit and this kind of weird fear that it's going to turn into a penis and make its owner a lesbian and just be unleashed on the world in absolute scenes. Wasn't there? This kind of weird idea that it could grow and become enormous. That meant you were really lustful.
It meant you were really lustful, but also I think it meant you were a threat to men. And that actually this idea that a sexualised woman was dangerous and threatening to society, I think you see throughout. And that's what drove a lot of the obscenity laws, was the idea that it wasn't good for the public good, that actually I found a quote. And I mean, understanding why the obscenity laws came into place are really important. And it was this idea. This is a quote from the Law of Libel, published on both sides of the Atlantic in the 18th century, arguing furthermore that obscene writings, speakings, and exhibitions had the tendency to, quote, disturb the peace and economy of the realm.
Wow.
And the idea that if women were empowered to have pleasure, well, they might then go off and be doing it with themselves. But actually also women were not supposed to be independent thinkers. So women who took matters into their own hands, who became fully sexualized, who became fully self-realized, were going to disturb the peace of the realm. I mean, it was all very neat and tidy. Women had a role. They needed to being procreative, having children, being married, keeping home, and that actually an independent woman was a dangerous thing because women were lesser and inadequate. Goodness knows what would happen if women had independent thought and independent action. And I think, therefore, this idea that the clitoris could grow and be like a penis threatened all of that thinking. Very Freudian before Freud.
Well, we're going to get to him because we can't talk about the clit and not talk about him. But I do remember reading one, it was like a 16th century medical text that said that it found a clitoris as long as a goose's neck. Or something totally bonkers. Yeah. He's just really going, no, you didn't. That didn't happen.
I was reading about Lefranc, who was actually wrote about sexuality, and I think he was the 1200s, so really, really old. But he was writing about the state of intersex and the idea that if you had a large clitoris, it would be unattractive to men and therefore it should be cut. And they really didn't like any ambiguity in genitalia. But in his writing, he was also very clear that if it got to a certain size and rigidity, it was a penis and therefore it was sacrosanct and should not be cut at all.
Wow.
But actually, if it was smaller than and large and ugly, then it was very easily sliced out
out with a knife.
Oh.
And shockingly, you can fast forward to the injustices on intersex surgeries that have happened. While I was writing this book, the Children's Laurie Hospital in Chicago finally put a moratorium on intersex surgeries on infants. And this idea to tidy everything up and create a kind of binary of gender, but also then this notion of what is normal and what is acceptable and what is attractive. And are you familiar, I think, with Jamie McCartney's work, The Great Wall of Vagina? And he acknowledges that it should be called The Great Wall of Vulva. And actually, for the majority of women, labia extend beneath the neat lines of the pudenda. And actually, clitorises come in all shapes and sizes. And this obsession with, in some way, kind of tidying it away and what isn't.
Tidying it up so we look like Barbie dolls with just nothing there whatsoever, just completely smooth surface.
Yeah, and there are plastic surgeons in America who talk about the Barbie vagina and that actually they market surgery. And Australia, they have pornography laws in which I think the quote is that the vulva should be, quote, healed to a single crease. And that actually...
No.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Oh my God.
This fear of looking at the vulva that actually... Why does it still scare people?
It does.
I mean, when did we ever see an artwork? We see penises all over the place. When did we ever see an artwork?
I know, wall-to-wall cocks, absolutely. But I want to jump back a little bit because I need to talk to you about the Victorians and what they were doing to the clitoris, because you've just touched on we're still doing genital surgery now to tidy everything up. And the Victorians weren't interested in tidying up vulvas for pornography, but there were people operating on vaginas and in particular clitorises, weren't there?
Yeah, they were. And in fact, the term clitorism entered the medical lexicon in a dictionary of medical science in 1854, being defined as an unusually large clitoris. And they started advocating clitoridectomy, not as a religious ritual, but as a minor fix for women who masturbated, were frigid, lesbian, insane, or diagnosed with nymphomania, depression, epilepsy, catalepsy, or hysteria. And I was really interested in understanding this word frigid. And I had always thought that frigid just meant we're not that keen on sex and maybe we're a little bit kind of cold to warm up. But actually, frigid very definitely means does not orgasm with penetration. And yes, and I've got a quote, in fact, Isaac Baker Brown, who wrote about, I'm sure you're familiar with him, his surgical techniques that he pioneered at London Surgical Home for Women, claiming that epilepsy and nervous disorders were caused by unnatural irritation of the clitoris. And his cure, for which he claimed a 70% success rate, was described as a harmless operative procedure. And I'm going to quote what he wrote about that procedure.
All right, just give me a sec.
Are you ready? Brace yourself.
Yep, I'm braced, let's do it.
The clitoris is freely excised either by scissors or a knife. I always prefer the scissors.
Oh,
I mean, it's absolutely chilling.
that's just, he's cutting it out with scissors.
Yes. I mean, like it can be snipped off like a piece of excess fat on meat. I mean, it's shocking. But then I came across 100 years later, James Burt of Ohio. In 1975, his book, The Surgery of Love, he wrote, "Women are structurally inadequate for intercourse. This is a pathological condition amenable by surgery." And his surgery often include removing the hood of the patient's clitoris as well as other vulvar alterations. I mean, structurally inadequate, this comes back down to this debate around penetrative sex being the definitive sex.
The be-all and end-all.
Yeah.
That's somebody who doesn't like his penis and is shit in bed and has decided that it's the woman that needs to be operated on. That's just... I think you can still find surgeons advertising to... sort of like snip the head of the clitoris to sort of like open it up, and apparently it makes it more sensitive. It doesn't, it's bollocks, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, and back to your question about the Victorians. I mean, the Victorians were just appalled at the idea that women could experience sexual pleasure through the clitoris and on their own. I mean, this really threatened the stability of their society. I found a paper that somebody wrote, and he talked about that if women masturbated, they would experience, quote, marital aversion.
Oh, it's true.
I mean, it was a really serious published article. Baker Smith in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease in 1892.
Wow.
A paper titled The Neurophysical Element in Conjugal Aversion. I mean, these were not jokes. These are really serious.
No, they're not. They're not. It's so ridiculous. It made me burst out laughing. But that
it is funny.
was published in a journal by people with brains.
But that's the whole point. They were not jokes at the time. They were published by very serious men of science and men of philosophy. And yeah, the Victorians were obsessed with what would happen if women experienced pleasure.
And we should say that Dr. Isaac Baker Brown, the man who was happily snipping out the clitorises of any woman who presented with anything so much as an ingrown toenail, he was eventually struck off, wasn't he? But he wasn't the only one doing this, not by a long shot.
No, and he was part of a culture that was writing about female sexuality, that was presenting it as flawed, as dangerous, as threatening.
We've got to talk about Freud, because he did a lot of damage to the clitoris, didn't he? He really did. But I suppose he's born out of this culture. What you've kind of got is this idea that the clitoris is almost like a rogue agent that needs to be got rid of, and this obsession develops with pleasure only through vaginal penetration. And the key understanding around that, as far as I can work out, is that you need a penis for it. If we allow the clitoris to the party, then that means that you can get off on your own. And you don't need a man, you don't need a penis. But what did Freud say about it? What did Freud have to say about their clitoris?
He claimed that the elimination of clitoral sexuality is the, quote, necessary precondition for the development of femininity, since it is immature and masculine in nature. Back to this idea again that actually a strong clitoris threatens men and the penis in some way. But the other thing that I really despise Freud for was his argument that because women didn't have a penis, that their superego was not fully developed. And the superego is in Freudian structure of the brain, it's the part that moderates women's ability to participate in society as civil and just beings. And he suggested that a woman's lack of a penis and the fact that she only has a clitoris makes her lesser.
Is this where we see this kind of weird distinction growing up that you still see today, that there are clitoral orgasms and vaginal orgasms, and that they are like, they're mates, but they're not of the same thing, which we now, because we know the structure of the clitoris, they're all clitoral orgasms, aren't they? Like, it might feel like it's kind of deep inside the vagina, but that's actually the clitoral roots that are reaching back.
Yes, I mean, there is so much that we don't understand about female sexuality. Is it all orgasms are clitoral orgasms, or also is some of it? I mean, some women experience orgasm through stimulation of the nipples. And there's been some fabulous research on women who are paralyzed and kind of beneath the lower half of their bodies, and they are still able to experience orgasm. So the relationship between orgasm as it's experienced in the brain and the pleasure side. But yes, you're right. If it's a genital orgasm, then actually where the clitoris is placed in the pelvic cavity will dictate how pleasure is experienced. And 75% of women, this is research studies done over the last 100 years, consistently say that they do not achieve orgasm without clitoral stimulation. And so therefore for women, penetration is not the default orgasm mechanism. But that doesn't mean that women want to choose. But it's this idea that it has to be penetration for it to count as sex. Oh, for goodness sake, why can't women have it multiple ways? You know?
Yeah, and it's still rooted into how we understand sex. We understand it very heteronormatively. We understand it as being penis and vagina. Like, maybe not even consciously, but when it comes to something like how do you lose your virginity, is what we all think that is someone puts a penis in your vagina, and then it leads to all kind of weird small print where people are like, no, I'm still a virgin, I've only had anal sex.
Look at the purity culture in America in fact, Peggy Orenstein has done fantastic research on this, and that actually within purity culture, teens are 4 times more likely to have had anal sex in the name of not having had sex.
Wow.
Because it's not sex, right?
It's not sex.
No, it's not sex. Doesn't count. It's not penis and vagina.
Oh my God. So what was Freud's legacy, do you think, when it comes to the clitoris? Because it'd be nice to think that this was just the kind of ravings of just someone who was shit in bed and it didn't have any impact. But do you think that his work and his writing did have a legacy on how we understood the clitoris?
I think it was incredibly formative because he was a product of the culture that he came from, but he spoke with such authority and was such a big thinker in our time. The way that he finally put the lid on the clitoral pleasure as being unfeminine and immature. And maybe it would have been different if thinking had not been interrupted by the First and Second World Wars, but certainly in Western culture, an awful lot of kind of scientific research, discovery, and thinking was inevitably ended incredibly abruptly because of those ruptures. And then post war, there were indeed other really huge issues to grapple with. And I don't think the world returned to exploring female sexuality until after that.
The refusal to acknowledge the clitoris as being a good and positive thing, or that it doesn't have a role in sex, that ultimately sort of erases lesbian sexuality as well, doesn't it? It just writes them out of the conversation entirely.
Yes, and I think this is interesting when you look at history, is that actually lesbians kind of slipped under the radar because people couldn't imagine. I mean, there wasn't a penis, so what could they be doing? So the assumption...
What were they doing?
So you've got, again, this kind of mismatch that women under their own steam might be experiencing pleasure, and that was rather frightening that came with the Victorians, but also, well, there wasn't really a penis, so... yeah, it didn't really count. And actually, in terms of prosecution of gay men, which was vile, lesbian women slipped under the radar. And in fact, indeed, even in lockdown, with the kind of a ton of videos on TikTok, with everyone kind of suddenly working out that they were TikTok lesbians. Because actually there was this whole like, oh my goodness, lesbians are having amazing sex. And when we go back to your first questions about the orgasm gap, is that actually within lesbian couples, there isn't that orgasm gap. I mean, of course, one woman knows exactly how to get another woman off. They're having great sex.
They're having amazing sex. And it was via TikTok that I found out that lesbians bring snacks to hookups quite often. That's incredible. Like, they bring baked goods and like dips and things. It's like, I've been wasting my time with these losers who just have a mattress on the floor, for fuck's sake.
I was going to say, I love that. Fuck me and feed me.
But that's it, isn't it? Because you can find the clitoris and you can make a good sandwich. And that's really what else do you need? Oh, I would talk to you about this forever and ever, but I'm not allowed to. But I suppose I have to finish this by saying, what do you think the future of the clitoris is? Because it's still such like an undiscovered, like, we know it's there obviously, but we've only just discovered how big it is, how far it goes back, how many nerve endings it has. There's still so much myth to unpick about it. Where do you think we're going with this? What do you think the future of the clitoris is?
I'm optimistic in that I think young men and young women today are much better versed in sexuality, in pleasure. I don't think they necessarily have the information, but I think they know that there's something wrong with it and something broken. And I feel incredibly encouraged that I think our battle is still with the dominant culture, but I think we have many, many more allies. And I don't know if you followed on Instagram last week, the presentation from somebody I follow on Instagram called, I think, the Queer Surgeon, but he specializes in transsexual surgical procedures. I'm not too sure I've got the vocabulary right there, but actually he is the person who's worked out that the clitoris has 10,000 plus nerve endings. And he has studied the clitoris because of the role that it plays in phalloplasty or any kind of gender reassignment surgery. And I think the clitoris will find champions in many, many places. And as we open up a discussion around what sex and sexuality really means and how important it is, I'm optimistic. I don't know, what are your thoughts on it?
I think that the generations that are coming through now are going to save us all. I think it's going to take some time, but you can see the shift around the discussions already. Like, even when I was a teenager, I remember there was this kind of weird narrative that if a guy went down on a woman, it was somehow like weak, like, you know, only pussies did it, that it was something that it wasn't manly to do it. And now we've got Harry Styles, God love him, singing about watermelon. If you've seen that video, but it's quite clearly like he's, you know, eating this watermelon and it's all sexual pleasure. And there was a DJ a couple of years ago who said something stupid about how he wouldn't give his woman oral pleasure. And then The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, like tweeted about it. And he was like, I always bring my A game. So I think there is a narrative that has shifted around it, that it's not, if a woman doesn't come, that's not like, she didn't just have a lovely time anyway. She didn't just come along for the scenery. Like, you have to do something about it. So I think that things are changing, and hopefully for the better. And I hope that like historians hundreds of years from now will just be like, yeah, they'll be in a completely clit-friendly world.
And I think the comedy world will help us. I mean, look at shows like Netflix, and increasingly we begin to see representations of sex in the movies and on TV that isn't purely driven by kind of, that hands-free missionary position, 4 thrusts and we're all done. And that actually you get, oh, God love him, Jamie Fraser in Outlander. And, we are increasingly seeing representations of heterosexual sex that isn't all about penetration.
Absolutely. Sarah, you've been incredible to talk to. And if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Oh, thank you. I love being followed on Instagram, and it is at its.personalgirls. And I post there about the history of sexuality and any other quirky things that take my fancy. And that's the best place to find me. And my book, The Sweetness of Venus, A History of the Clitoris, is available in bookshops in North America and on Amazon and in the rest of the world. But it's also read by the fabulous Esther McVeigh as an audiobook if you love to consume your literature that way.
Amazing. You have been wonderful to talk to, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me betwixt the sheets.
Anytime, Kate. I love it.
Thank you for listening, and thank you so much to Sarah for coming on and talking to me. I had so much fun talking to her. And if you had fun, if you liked what you heard, if we've enlightened you, if we rocked your world, please don't forget to like, review and subscribe wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Join me again betwixt the sheets, the history of sex, scandal and society, a podcast by History Hit. This podcast includes music by Epidemic Sounds.
Cars don't worry about how they sound. But people do. That's why My Car offer general repairs at an affordable price. A logbook service with 12 months free roadside assistance and free puncture repairs on selected tyres from their tyre care range. T's and C's.